everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of EduMatch. I am so excited to chat today with my good friend, Dr. Sawsan Jaber. So she is at SJ Educate. Hey, Doc, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well. So super glad to have you here. Tonight is a topic that we really need to dive into, and I really appreciate you being here to share with us. So if you don't already know Doc, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. So Dr. Sawsan Jaber is a global educator of over 20 years. She's held a variety of leadership positions both in the U.S. and abroad. Dr. Jaber is currently a high school English teacher at East Layton High School in Franklin Park. She founded Education Unfiltered Consulting and works with schools across the country on curriculum mapping, strategic planning, custom tailoring a social justice curriculum for schools, and anti-bias training. Dr. Jaber is a board director of Our Voice Alliance, charged with amplifying the voices of teachers of color to create more equity for students of color. She completed her PhD with a focus on inclusion and belonging of students from marginalized communities. Additionally, Sawsan is one of the founders of the Arab-American Education Network. She's a national board certified teacher and has focused most of her research on engaging students in equity work and advocating for Arab and Muslim students. She offers the experience of being a member of a minority group as a daughter of refugees from Deir Yassin, Palestine. Sawsan is a lifelong learner in an ever-changing world. Dr. Jaber has been featured in several conferences and podcasts. So again, Sawsan, we are so glad to have you here, and welcome again to the show.
I'm honored to be here, and I appreciate you so much, Dr. Sarah, for opening this platform and allowing us to talk about this very important issue that not very many people are willing to talk about. So we appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much. And the feeling is absolutely mutual. So is there anything else that you want to tell us about yourself before we dive into the conversation?
No, I think you got it all.
Okay. All right, fantastic. So tonight we're going to be talking about the current situation in Palestine. So what should educators know about what's currently happening in Palestine?
Well, I think that the first thing that educators need to know is that probably everything that they've learned in school and everything that they're immersed in, whether it's from the media or in traditional curriculum, is probably untrue, right? Like we already know as people of color that the media and curriculum, historic curriculum, is very well versed in a single story perspective of who's been more powerful historically, and it's not controlled by people of color. And so the narrative that's told is often the narrative that's not the one that's in favor of people of color, and that's not any different when it comes to Palestine, right? So we have to really learn the truth about the issue, and the truth is not in the media, it's not in the history books, and it's not in the curriculum. And that's going to really take the work for people to really realize and learn their own truths. And I think the difference between, obviously Palestine isn't a new issue, right? It's been under occupation since 1948. And the indigenous people of the land are the Palestinian people, but that's not the story that we hear. That being said, I think that what's different here and what's different this time is that there's a lot of social media that's coming live from the ground in Palestine that's really revealing a different side of the story that people don't often hear, and is forcing people to look at a different side of the story.
Right, absolutely. And I love what you said about the single story, the single story that we tend to get a lot of times from our textbooks, from curriculum, and even news outlets. So as we know, they're often biased. So how can we as educators help students gain a more accurate understanding of global issues and social justice?
I really think that first it has to start with us doing the truth, learning our own truths ourselves, right? And that means that we have to look beyond the stereotypes. In a lot of American schools, you have Palestinian-American students that are constantly being fed stereotypical understandings and teachings about themselves, right? Like in my children's school district, you have 17 to 20% population of Palestinian students. And we were having a conversation with choir parents this year because they are practicing and playing the Israeli national anthem in the school for choir, which leads to a bunch of questions like, why are we playing the Israeli national anthem in a public school, period, in America? What are we trying to normalize, right? Why are we constantly being taught in curriculum that Israel has a right to defend itself and that Palestinians are the evil ones and the Israelis are the heroes, right? Why is it that historically, if we look at Arab curriculum in schools relating to Arabs or Muslims in general, it's constantly meant to demonize and create this culture of fear around Arabs and Muslims, which also makes it more acceptable for us to see the images that we're seeing on television and to justify them, because Arabs are this group of people that have a really hard time coexisting with other people, and they have this tendency to blow things up and constantly like send these rockets to Israel, right? So this whole idea of even Israel having a right to defend itself needs to be unpacked. It needs to be unpacked in the media. It needs to be unpacked in classrooms, because when we're using it to justify ethnic cleansing and genocide, then there needs to be more of an understanding about that. And that, from just understanding basically that Palestinians are the indigenous people of the land, that Israel in 1948 invaded that land and colonized that land, that the Palestinian people in Palestine have absolutely no rights. The Israeli government, their colonizer, controls their freedom of movement, their water, their electricity, their medical care, their jobs, their food, their access to natural resources. Just even being able to get a COVID shot, right? Like that's also something that they haven't had access to. So they do not have the right to resist their oppressors without being considered aggressors or being considered or being aggressed upon every time they try, right? And so when you're talking against anything that has to do with Israeli apartheid or Israeli, like the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, you're considered anti-Semitic. And that's the term that's being thrown around to quiet Palestinian people from talking about the issues that are actually taking place in Palestine, when Palestinian people have never, ever had any contention with Jewish people. On the contrary, pre-1948, Christians, Palestinians, and Muslims and Jews lived harmoniously together in Palestine. There was never an issue. And I think that Palestinian, their sense of hospitality is what opened the doors for everybody to come to Palestine, and what initially somehow led and made them susceptible to this occupation. So the fact that we are considered oppressors, and the fact that we are considered, the violent ones, and the fact that we're considered anti-American or extremist for resisting your invader, for resisting this occupation, for resisting the fact that you have no freedom of movement, for resisting the fact that you can't go and get a COVID shot like everybody else in the world, that you can't visit your family on another side, that you can't, if you need medical attention, go from one part of Palestine to the other. People are dying on checkpoints because they can't get medical help. Children are being shot. Children are being jailed. There are hundreds of 9 and 10-year-old children in jail. So if we're going to look at Palestinian occupation, what do we expect people who are living in these circumstances to do? To just be sitting ducks and continue to receive this oppression and not defend themselves, right? And so it's really disconcerting to hear and read the opinions on social media, on the news, on Twitter, from other educators even, about their perceptions of how much they expect the Palestinian people to tolerate. And how would we feel if somebody came into our home and took our home? Or if we decided today, or the international community decided today, to give half of the United States to another group of people, and that group of people decided to come into your home and tell you to leave your home so that can be their home now. No one would accept that. And so I can't understand why it wasn't okay for South Africa and it wasn't okay for all of these other countries, but it's supposed to be okay for the Palestinian people to tolerate. And for Palestinian-American students to have to listen to that and accept it in their classroom and in their curriculum. And what it's doing to Palestinian kids is two things. It's either causing them to feel this detachment from school and leave a sense of who they are at home, never being able to bring their cultural and linguistic diversity into the classroom and really celebrate who they are, because who they are is something that is demonized in the United States and feared. And they can't talk about their issues. They can't even talk about these things to their teachers in their classrooms. They can't talk about it to their peers, because it's been so misconstrued and so miscommunicated and misshapen that nobody can really understand it for what it is anymore historically. And it's been taught this way for such a long time. There isn't a single history textbook, very few teachers who are even willing to take this on and talk about it with fidelity. And our kids are sitting in classrooms every single day being re-traumatized over and over again by listening to stereotypes of themselves. And the minute that they speak up to defend themselves, they're shut down. If they speak up to defend themselves, if they're even bringing that part of who they are into the classroom to begin with.
Wow. Yes. So that kind of brings us to our next question. I'm seeing all the comments coming through, and people are really reacting, and listening to you. I'm very moved as well. So what are some actionable steps that educators can follow to support our Palestinian-American students?
Well, I think the first thing is for them to really think about understanding the truth about Palestine and not seeing it as like a two-sided problem, like it's both sides and both sides have to think about it. We have to name the oppressor and name the oppressed. It's about time that America, the American people, name the oppressor and name the oppressed. Americans need to see that our government is financially supporting apartheid, ethnic cleansing, settler colonialism, genocide, whatever you want to call it. Our government is taking our tax dollars. We are complicit with these things that are happening in Palestine, and we can't deny our hand in it. My tax dollars and your tax dollars, Dr. Sarah, are supporting the apartheid. And so if we don't start to disrupt these systems in our educational institutions, they will never be disrupted. When our president stands up in front of the entire world shamelessly vowing more financial support, and our vice president shamelessly vow more financial support to apartheid and ethnic cleansing, while we have homelessness in America, while we have people in a pandemic without insurance, without medical insurance, while we have students who are drowning in educational debt, we need that money here at home. If nothing else, our money needs to be here at home, right? And so if we want to take that on the other side, but also to think about knowing that, like, Palestinian students sitting in American classrooms, we can't compare the experiences of children in Palestine who are living the occupation every single day. But Palestinian children in America, educators have to recognize that these students are students that need trauma-informed teaching, that they have to recognize the traumas and the connections between the history and the present of these students specifically, and that they also deserve to be met in safe environments like trauma-enforced teaching requires teachers to do. How many Palestinian children feel safe in schools? How many of them can bring their whole selves into our classrooms without being accused of being anti-Semitic or anti-American? Our kids are falling victim to perpetual identity theft every single day. They can't be Palestinian Americans, right? They have to choose which side they're on, because there are sides. America has chosen a side, even though they'd like to think that they didn't. President Trump officially named Jerusalem one of the holiest Islamic sites, the capital of Israel. Right? And President Biden, in his very first few months of his presidency, is already vowing financial support. So how many of our children are like able to really claim that identity with pride without being made to feel like they're complicit to something else, right? And how many of them are abandoning that identity so that they can survive the system? The same system that oppresses Black kids, the same system that oppresses Latinx kids, the same system that oppresses women. How many of our children are abandoning those identities to survive that system? How many schools are complicit in the theft through curriculum Zionist mantra that has been subliminally embedded into the minds and values and beliefs of most Americans, and has reinforced this idea that Americans have that Arabs, Palestinians are violent and unable to coexist, right? How many teachers are compassionate and avoiding re-traumatizing our children? Our children are asked to live this ethnic cleansing and the genocide and the erasure of their people again and again. I grew up in a very Palestinian home. My family was we come from a village in 1948. Deir Yassin was one of the first villages to be massacred. Most of our villagers were killed in 1948. My grandfather and lost several of his brothers. My great-great-grandmother fought in that war. Right? We grew up watching every aggression. We grew up glued to our TV screens every time something happened. We lived it. We breathed it. And even though it was the first time I went to visit Palestine was like a few years ago with my daughters, I loved it. It was in my veins. It's in my blood. It's what the music that we listened to. It's the culture that we understood. And a lot of that was intentional on behalf of people who were forced out of their homes. Right? The first prime minister said they will grow old and their children will forget. So our culture, our families, our ancestors ensured that we wouldn't forget. My kids didn't forget. My kids won't forget. Their children will not forget. We won't forget until justice is served. And justice is not going to be served as long as countries that are superpowers that consider themselves to be democratic right? Which is ironic because even Israel is considered to be the only democracy in the United States. Meanwhile, it's marginalizing this group of people in such open and very like shameless ways, and very like it's not even they're what's happening in Palestine is no longer a secret, right? And everybody and they're doing it very openly, yet we still call them the most democratic country in the Middle East. And so like the ironies of what does democracy even mean anymore when democratic countries are either supporting our apartheid or causing ethnic cleansing. Are we really a democracy when we're doing this, right? And I will repeat, like in America, we have Arab and Palestinian people who are what banks call failed citizens, right? We were never accepted systemically in this country. And so that leads them to hold on closer to their cultures. Couple that with people who are forcefully expelled from their countries, there's a sense of like pride and a sense of longing to go back, to have a right to return, which is by international law something that they should have, that they don't have, right? So you have Palestinians all over the world, and as it stands right now, they have no right to return, and they don't fit here, and they can't go back there. Like even me standing here and saying these things in public and advocating for Palestinian rights, I do this at the risk of the next time I take my American passport and try to enter into Palestine, I could be rejected by Israelis because I'm considered a threat for speaking against the Israeli government, even though here in America, this is my democratic right. And even though here in America, we also try to censor our First Amendment rights by saying that if people, supported the BDS movement, that they would also be fined and jailed for it. So even here in America, speaking against Israel and Israel, it's a threat no matter what, because we have this blind support to Israel that we're not willing to question, that we're not willing to to get to the core of what is the truth here. And I just can't understand it. I can't understand why people can't just see that this is systemic, that it is the same oppression that has been oppressing the Black community, that it's the same oppression that's been oppressing the Latinx community, and that as long as people of color continue to function in silos, that this divide and conquer mentality is the design of the oppressor, and it makes us weak. And so that we all need to speak, and we all need to speak against and stand together and ally with each other on Palestine, on just like we have to for Ferguson, and we have to for all these other causes. We need to come out of our silos and hold each other's hands and move each other forward. It's just about time.
Absolutely. Yes, we all need to stand together. And a threat to, oh my goodness, I'm about to butcher the quote, but injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. So absolutely. So if a teacher does, even if they do not have any Palestinian-American students, then why is it important for them to talk about what is happening with their students?
Because we are the voters, right? And we have a voice with our elected officials. And when we say to our elected officials, your constituents do not want you to fund apartheid on the other side of the world, and we want our government to insist that there's a ceasefire, that even if the ceasefire happened this moment, places like Gaza that have been under siege for over 10 years and the people can't move. There's an air, sea, and like a land blockade. These are people that are open air jail cell, and that they're constantly being bombed. They have no army. They have no bomb shelters. They have nothing. And they're constantly being bombed. That even if that ceasefire happened right now, that these countries will probably never recover from the situation that they're in right now. Right. And so when we can put pressure on our government, when the American population in general can put pressure on our government to demand a ceasefire as a superpower, when America is not the only one vetoing certain things in the United Nations because of their blind support to the United Nations, to Israel, right? We, the people, will then push that change, and will vote people in who share those values. As it stands right now, Israel has bipartisan support from both Republicans and Democrats, right? Which is a shame. And so in order for us to change that, the constituents have to demand change. And the only way for us to demand change is if we know the truth. And the only place we're going to get the truth is in a classroom. So it really starts at whether we're talking about Black Lives Matter or any other social injustice, I strongly believe that the schools will influence policy and government, and not the other way around. Once people are more educated about the truth of these stories, and they're no longer immersed and brainwashed with single story mantra, at that point, we are now moving forward because the people are voting in other people who are able to really meet the needs of their constituents and have the shared values of their constituents. As it stands now, we have the shared values of the constituents because the constituents don't know better. Right? So when we're talking about things like, Arab students and Palestinian students having a sense of double consciousness because their peers don't accept who they are. What does it mean when our students have a detachment of who they are and they're forced to create these like pseudo personalities in order for them to survive their context, and they have like this detachment or isolation? Who then is disrupting, right? This mantra and this mentality. Right? So it has to happen in the classroom. It has to happen through curriculum, and then media will follow and government and policy will follow. Unless the truth is starting to be told in educational settings, then it's constantly going to be muffled, and we're going to continue to get this idea that Israel is the only democracy in the United States. The Arab and Muslim people have a history of being violent. And everything that's happening in Palestine is always justified because of the Holocaust. And yes, the Holocaust was a tragedy, and the Holocaust was horrible, and the Holocaust should have never happened. But the Holocaust does not justify a country that's being built on the ashes of the Palestinian people, another Holocaust that's happening every single day. And it doesn't justify the ethnic cleansing of another group of people. And that's how we're teaching it. This is how it's being taught in American classrooms every single day. It's justified. In another classroom in the high school in our local district, a teacher was teaching Palestine and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and said, Palestinians walk around stabbing people left and right. That's not happening, right? But that's the general, and the Palestinian students in the classroom tried to speak their truth, and they were shut down immediately. So the frustration's happening across the board. Like these are things that are constantly coming back in curriculum, in social studies classrooms, in English classrooms. As a graduate of schools here from K through 20, I have never read a text that wasn't a stereotypical representation of who I am. I have only read stereotypical representations of who I am. And I never had the language or the ability or the tools to self-advocate or speak against that. So we need to arm our students with the truth about the histories of these places and about the histories of these issues and these matters, the interconnectedness between this injustice and other injustices. But we also need to arm them with the ability to self-advocate and know their rights as communities and as individuals, and fight against being taught single story stereotypes about themselves, so that they can come in with their linguistic and cultural pluralism proudly and own their Palestinian intersection with pride. Right? And not feel like being Palestinian means I'm anti-American, or being Palestinian or speaking about Palestine or advocating for the things that are happening in Palestine with the Palestinian people makes me an anti-Semitic, anti-American enemy.
That is so, so true. And I love what you're saying about how we can empower our students to change the narrative in the world. Like it starts with, it starts in the schools. So it's so important to have conversations like this. So this is yet another reason why I'm so thankful that you're here today, sharing about this. So how can educators further educate themselves on this issue?
There's so much out there, Sarah. Like, I feel like nowadays people who don't know, it's because they have this like selective, or like this selective, like they choose not to know, right? So I really think like American Muslims for Palestine is a great organization. They're all about education. They're willing to send resources and share information all the time. You can follow them on social media. There are so many outlets. There's so many people too. Like if you reach out to me on my Twitter page, I can tell you who to follow as well. There's tons of books. Angela Davis has From Ferguson to Palestine. She talks about so much about how like the interconnectedness of the Black Lives Matter movement with Palestine and the apartheid that's happening in Palestine. There's so much information that if we don't know, it's because we choose not to know at this point. And I think that really understanding that this is not a Muslim issue, that it's not an Arab issue, that this is a human issue, and that we really need to learn that truth for humanity's sake and humanize the Palestinian people and see beyond the stereotypes that the media has like created and that history has shaped and kind of tacked on to the Palestinian people. It's about time. It's long overdue. I feel like our government has failed Palestinians has failed American Palestinians. Our schools have failed Palestine, Palestinians, and American Palestinians. And we have to understand the price that humanity pays when these failures take place, right? Mm-hmm. Today, the injustices in Palestine, and a lot of people are quiet and they're watching. A lot of people, a lot of educators, friends who are people who are crying for social justice and advocating for social justice are quiet. And I keep asking myself, where are my allies, right? Where are you? Where are those people who are constantly advocating for social justice? This is an American issue. Your tax dollars are supporting this injustice. Yes, we have to be talking about it because that has to change. So I don't know where my allies are because so many have been quiet, and we have to understand that today it's Palestine, tomorrow it's somebody else, right? Just like 400 years ago, it was Black oppression. And if we all stood up against Black oppression 400 years ago, we probably wouldn't be talking about Palestinian oppression today. And so the interconnectedness of injustice, and once we turn a blind eye to injustice somewhere, it's like opening the door for injustice everywhere else. And so it's about time, within our locus of control, as teachers, as principals, as curriculum writers, as media specialists, as whatever as extra, special clubs, as whatever it is our role is in schools, or if you are somebody who has, a role outside of schools, it is about time that we use our locus of controls to take action. It's long overdue. And I think that, like I said, the truth, if you don't know, it's because you choose not to know.
That is powerful. And yes, indeed. I love what you were saying about how we can each make a difference within our locus of control. And I think that you kind of already covered our final question, but I'm going to pose it anyway, just in case there's anything that, that you might have been saving for this last question. But some things as educators that we can do to take action. Do you have any suggestions for anyone who might be watching right now?
So many. The first thing you can do is see your student in the classroom, right? Like, my child has the right to hear a narrative in her classroom or on the news that's not one that's perpetually positioning her as a defender, or silencing her altogether. That's the first thing. So see your kids, understand your kids, immerse yourself in the beautiful Palestinian culture. It is a beautiful culture. The Arab culture is the most beautiful, generous, giving culture. It's not what it's portrayed on the media. The second thing you can do is make sure to bring the narratives into your classroom and create spaces. Work with your district leadership team, your school leadership team, whatever it is, whatever, again, your locus of control is within your school, to bring the narrative into the classroom and start shifting mindsets on Palestine and on the Palestinian issue. Talk to your local your local representatives. Have your local representatives, if nothing else, fight this funding and keep our local dollars home and use them for our own things that we need to be done here in America. Voice your opinion, post, right? Like, posting is awareness. We all have followers. There's people following you that aren't following me. When you're posting on Palestine, someone who didn't hear this podcast might listen and might hear something that might spike their interest to go and learn more. So I think that it's really important for us to use our social media platforms, to use our classroom platforms, to use as many of our platforms that we have to speak truth to power. It's about time on Palestine and on every other injustice. We can't be quiet. Protest. Join the protest. It's so important to protest. The American government needs to see that we are not okay with their funding. The people in Palestine need to see that they have international support by as many people that support them, to keep their morale and to keep them resisting, and to just give them the will to continue living in this inhumane context that they're living in every single day, day in and day out. It just continues to get worse. And educate yourself. I think really that's the beginning and the end of everything, because we can't educate others and decipher a stereotype and a lie from the truth if we don't know better. So educating ourselves is definitely key. I will post also on my Twitter page some other texts for anyone who's interested in reading some books and getting more information. I know AMP will always be happy to organize sessions for teachers if they're interested, whatever support people need. It's unfortunate Palestinian people are also teaching while they're living these traumas, but whatever it's going to take for us to move ourselves from this point to a point where more people know our truth and can support and advocate for the truth, then we're willing to do the work. So you can DM me if you need some extra support or need some resources. We're happy to do that.
Hi, Dr. Jaber. Yeah, and I'm sorry, Dr. Sarah got kicked off. Before we go, how can people get in touch with you online?
The best way is SJ Educate. My Twitter handle, SJ Educate. If you're not on Twitter, I'm on Facebook as well, Sawsan Jaber. You can find me there. And I'm very good with responding to DM messages through Twitter. So I think that's probably the quickest way to get a hold of me.
All right, great. And I just made the decapitalized. I'm so sorry. And it was me that was spelling your name incorrect. It wasn't Dr. Sarah. So I apologize for that too. I love that. But Twitter is the best way to get a hold of you, is what you said.
Yes.
Wonderful. We want to respect everybody's time. This was amazing. I learned so much, and I am going to put everything that you just said into practice, and I will be sharing this out onto my platforms. So thank you so much. Are there any last words that you want to share before we say goodbye?
No, I just hope that something that I said pierced people's hearts and their minds, and that their humanity and their empathy really move them to take some kind of action, and to just, even if nothing else, just really start to find their own truths, because like I said, it's about time and it's long overdue. And our kids deserve it. Our kids deserve better. Our kids deserve to know the truth. Palestinian kids and other kids, they all deserve to know the truth.
Yes,
I'm going to put that thought down.
Yes. Thank you so much for popping in. And I apologize to everybody. My internet just conked out on me. That is the peril of living where I live. So my apologies. And thank you to Melody for jumping in and covering for that. But Dr. Sawsan, really want to thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your heart, just sharing so much, and always being so giving to the educational community. So I learned a ton tonight, and saw the comments coming through. What you were saying was really resonating with the audience. So really want to thank you for your time and for all that you do.
And I want to thank you for all that you do, and for creating these platforms for people to listen and hear, like I said earlier, a side of the story that not many people are willing to entertain or consider. And so you're always paving ways, Dr. Thomas, and I appreciate you immensely for that. And so I thank you again for allowing me to use this platform to talk and to share some of my truths.
Well, thank you, my friend, and likewise. And did you already shared out your Twitter and every way that people could get connected with you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. So do yourself a favor. If you're not already connected with Dr. Sawsan Jaber, then please do so. She is phenomenal. As you can see, just a wealth of information, very passionate, knowledgeable, brilliant educator. And we definitely want to thank you for your time tonight. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in as well. Thank you for your comments and for your engagement. Thank you to Melody as well, especially for that last minute audible coming in and saving the day when my internet popped out. So wanted to once again thank you all for your time and for your attention. And we're going to go ahead and sign off for this evening. So thanks again, and everyone have a wonderful rest of your evening.